Hello and welcome to the Coaching Podcast, coaching for success in sport and business. Your host is Emma Doyle, the energy and high performance under pressure coach who is a world leader in unleashing human potential. Buckle up for this high octane session. Let them have it, coach.
This season of the Coaching Podcast is brought to you by SAM, the AI tool built for the coaching world. If you're a coach, SAM takes the stress out of marketing so you can spend more time doing what you love, coaching. And if you're looking for a coach, think of SAM as a matchmaking service without the romance, helping you find the right coach at the right time. Discover how simple it can be at trysam.ai. G'day everybody and welcome to the Coaching Podcast. Today I'm in the house, with Jared Jacobs. Now, Jared is a WTA Tour coach, founder of Mojo Tennis Boutique Training Center in Arizona, but basically travels the world on this concept of not only being a tennis coach, an on-court coach. I think you're very much an off-court coach and do that mindset work simultaneously. You blend the two together, and I cannot wait to chat about both of those things. So dear to my heart. But I'd always love to start with a quote. The one I chose for you, Jared. So welcome to the show. And pressure doesn't create character; it reveals the habits you've trained.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, one of the nice things about tennis is like it exposes everything. It exposes preparation. It exposes awareness. Tennis as a way of putting you on the spot over and over and over again. But this is one of the things I like about it, because you get the opportunity to test your training, to see how you hold up. And then, whether it's again tomorrow or next week, you do it again over and over and over again. And hopefully it teaches us a little bit about ourselves. It's funny, I think the perception of what coaches on tour do versus what they actually do is pretty wildly different. The perception is like that we give tennis lessons on the road, which is not really what it's like. Like I'm not really like teaching how to hit forehands and backhands so much out here. And sometimes there's discussions of that, but I would say that's like 3%, and everything else is like preparation and mental. How do we put ourselves in the right headspace? And for every player, it can be a little bit different. Sometimes the day before is like 4 hours of practice and warm-ups, or an hour or two. And sometimes it's like 5 minutes. It helps to know your player a little bit.
Yeah, I think already you're touching on the individual aspect, and thanks for clarifying that myth. What about on the other side, even off air, we were touching on balance. And, as a coach, you're there with the player. You're there. Right now, you're at Indian Wells, for example, and even, locking down a time for this interview. You've got 2 practice sessions, and then you've got the dinner tonight, but you need to be flexible. How does a coach maintain boundaries, or is that also a myth?
Well, I think everybody does it a little bit differently. I think it's important to remember, even it feels like we're the coaches, so like we're in charge, but the players are the bosses. And in the end, like, we're here to help. And that help goes so far as they want it. So I think for the most part, it's not like laying down laws. It's encouraging good behaviors and habits. And hopefully if you're good enough at like making a compelling argument for like, hey, maybe, don't go play 18 holes of golf because it's 97 degrees out right now, even though like you've got 4 hours to kill and it seems like it'd be a great idea and it would be really fun. Maybe there's something else you can do with the time. But in the end, for the most part, what I find is the players at this level kind of do whatever they want to do. And it's not even always a bad thing. Sometimes actually what we want is like, hey, relax. Like, your whole life is not this tournament. Your life is a lot bigger than that. And it always feels like, this is why I think it's so hard for tennis players who are on the road, and you might lose 3, 4, 5 weeks in a row in the first round, and and you're spending your whole life just like in a hotel trying to prepare and then losing. Um, I think it's easy to get pretty down under those circumstances. You're away from home and your friends and family and pets. So sometimes I think the thing that helps you the most in any given moment isn't the thing that helps you long term. So sometimes it's weighing, the benefits of like, yeah, like let's go do something fun right now, even though I know tomorrow's going to be long and it's possible you regret it. Long term, I think what you have to do is try and figure out how to have a life on the road in the middle of these tournaments. Like, don't just order room service every night and miss out on like the cities we're in and potentially like great food and cultural experiences or memorable hikes, even though they might take away a little bit from the things on your court physically. I think mentally they can help a lot, and sometimes that's the bigger win.
What I hear in what you're saying as well is in terms of the boundaries or the balance is it depends.
Yeah,
Sometimes
yeah.
it's a cop out, right? It's like how well do you know your player? Yep, okay, everyone's so different. So what does that person need? It depends. The boundary, it depends.
When I first came back and started doing in tournaments, I was with a player who was like 31, 32 years old and married and like, fully capable adult. Is very different than working with like, a 17 or 18-year-old who like really sort of maybe has less of an idea. I would say with that job, I actually probably learned a lot more that's helped me. I was learning from her as much as I was helping at the same time. But I think I realized traveling with that player how important it was to do things that created a life, not just about like every week about the tennis. Because I think when you first start, like I did, the first tournament I did was Eastbourne going into Wimbledon. And I was like, oh, this is going to be like a cool trip. Like we're going to go to Eastbourne and Wimbledon, and then I'll come home. And we went to Eastbourne, and like the partner we were supposed to play with was hurt, so we ended up like signing in with someone else, and it was like chaos right away. And then Wimbledon, and like the plan was home after Wimbledon, and it was like, oh, actually, instead we're going to change the plan, and now we're going to go to Romania. And I was like, oh, okay, so like not home. And then from Romania, it was somewhere else. It was like San Jose. And I was like, oh, so this just doesn't end. It just keeps going and going. Hopefully, you're creating sort of some of these opportunities in ways that are helpful and sort of help create good habits. I mean, in the end, I don't think I've ever met a player who doesn't want to win. So the question is figuring out like, what's the right formula for you? It does feel like a cop out, but it does depend. I could say with one player it's this, and with another player it's that.
Staying on winning for a minute, personally, when I was coaching more on the junior tour, I've only really come across 3 girls where I said you have to step up and win for Australia today, and they were able to do that in that moment where the focus was, like you said, they all want to win, so just park that for a minute.
Yeah.
And in the moment, when I focused on the outcome with these 3 players, they could handle it and they could step up. And they also had a lot of adversity in their young careers with outside circumstances. Every other girl that I've met, if the more I focused on, made some mistakes as a young coach on the outcome, it was like we'd push the outcome further away. So even though it depends, right? So we're parking that and we all want to win, so park that. Let's talk. Yeah, so I guess where I'm going with this is in the moment where now coaches can coach. It's not illegal anymore. You can say 1 or 2 things. I'm curious in those moments, and you can take one specific example if you want.
Yeah.
The cue words that you are reinforcing, as you said, it's not about how to hit your forehand, but take us into the mindset of the coach in those moments. And what do you think on what I said with regards to being cue word and focus, process obsessed versus outcome driven?
I think, one of the things when you're working with a player is you want to know how they're going to respond to what you say. Like, I want to know, like, some players will be motivated by like, hey, like, we want this win. Like this week, um, we talked to Alex. I think his ranking is like 157 right now, and his high is 125. And a good week here probably gives him his career high ranking. Do we talk about that? Is that something that motivates him? Or do we kind of ignore it and just really just focus on like the things that we want to do? And I think for him, it's motivating knowing like he's really close, he's put in the work. So we talked about it and we're like, hey, if it doesn't happen, that's okay. Maybe it'll happen next week. But I want you to know where you're at and how much work you've put in, and let's really make a push. Like of course, we want the result. I traveled with Danielle Collins for a long time, who's like a remarkably good ball striker, and sometimes would get in her own head on the tennis court, and people would be like, "Well, why don't you tell her to do this on her forehand or that or hit this shot?" And I'm like, "Well, mostly because I think she'll ignore that advice." And so the question is like, she knows how to hit forehands and she knows how to hit backhands, but when she's getting in her own way, those things become really hard. So rather than tell her something that she already knows, it's how can I change the the state of mind? Like, can we relax? Hey, like take a couple deep breaths sometimes. Like I know you can come up with the answer if you're in the right head place. So sometimes it's lighten the mood a little bit. Sometimes it can be like a little joke or just like a little encouragement. But mostly it's how do you get back to a place where you're solving the the problems for yourself? They're the one out there. They can feel what the ball is doing. It's one thing to see, and sometimes we can offer something like their focus has to be in a certain place, and sometimes we can see like, hey, they're moving early on the serve, like they're cheating this way or they're doing that, and that information can help them make better choices. But it's not really like, hey, do this or do that. I think most of the time it's about putting them back in a head place where they compete well.
Couldn't agree more. It's and you have a master's degree in sports psychology. If you think about a young Jared, take me back. Like,
Oh man, it's funny. Yeah, so I did my master's in sports, like mostly because when I was trying to play, what I saw playing was that people weren't winning or losing matches because of how they were playing or how good they were. It was mostly like what were the things going on in their head that were preventing them from winning or losing. So I was curious about it to begin with, and then after I did my master's, I actually did some post grad work in hypnosis, which I found fascinating mostly because it taught me how to work with language in sort of specific ways. Um, so I tend to be much more careful with like specific words that I use and images that I try and create.
yeah, yeah. I mean, well, thank you for saying that. I'm also did some work in hypnosis, and I just what fascinates me about the work that I did, and you and I, a blanket statement here, but the mind and the body are intrinsically connected, right? I think we're on the same page there.
When you ask someone that question, like, do you believe there's a mind body connection? I think almost universally people would say, like, well, yeah, of course. But then if you ask them to explain what that means, it's sort of like, well, I don't know. Um, for me, thoughts are like tangible things. They affect the way we feel, they affect the way we perform. So the way that we think and the specific words and images that we use to think will really have a big effect on how we play. And part of what I'm trying to do is get players to understand that and be a little bit more intentional with how they think instead of like, can't make a forehand today, which really gives you nowhere to go, rather than like, hey, get your feet set on this, which is a little bit more positive and forward thinking. Like, watch where your balance is. These are things that can help going forward. Whereas, like, I'm just like everything else is sort of an excuse for why I didn't do it. Um, and I think the way we think tends to be habitual. We have patterns, and learning to recognize what those patterns are with one players and help them break them, hopefully leads to some success.
Yeah.
And tennis is a sport where you really have to be willing to fail over and over and over again. We lose so much in this sport. It's easy to feel like you're not doing well, even when you're at this level, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. But
Yeah, there's not too many other sports, is there, that every second point you're almost losing.
yeah, I mean, if you're winning 52% of points, you're having like an amazing year, and not only just point to point, but like tennis players probably lose like 30 times a year, 40 times a year. I think the sport that we get compared to the most is boxing, and like maybe they fight once a year or twice a year. And they have people in their corner. Boxing is, I think, known as like a people are shouting instructions at them the whole time. We talk about, I think this is one of my pet peeves in tennis too. Announcers on TV will watch matches and they'll talk about coaching, and then they'll say like, it's a terrible rule. Like tennis is really about like players learning to figure things out. And no one ever stands up and presents the other side of the argument, which to me is the much more compelling side, which is, as a sport, we have a responsibility to put out the best product we can. And watching someone struggle and not come up with the answers or not try as hard as they can because they don't have support that they might need doesn't make for a good or interesting product. If you watched basketball or baseball or football with no coaches, what you would see is a product that is demonstrably worse, which is, I think, a lot of times what we are okay presenting in tennis. And I think it's a huge mistake. I think listening to the way coaches talk to players, the things that they say, can be really valuable for young players, for other coaches. It's interesting just as a spectator to watch the dynamic. Tennis just has to do much better, in my mind.
Well, thank you for
Yes, at least coaching is allowed now. And again, like I don't think, for the most part, coaches are having huge tactical contributions over the course of the match. You're helping players sort of navigate their emotions a little bit and maybe like not give up on themselves when they might otherwise. But most of the time, what we're there doing when the player plays is watching and trying to learn, like, all right, what are we working on next? Like, what's breaking down in this match? What do we have to fix before the next match? And the ability to talk, I think it's normal. We talk during practice. We ask each other questions. Hey, what are you feeling? What do you see right now? Can you try this? When I hear people talk about how bad the coaching is for the sport, it just makes me think they haven't even considered what the alternative is. So,
Well,
yeah,
you're on a roll with your pet peeves. Keep going.
yeah. Sorry.
No. Go,
I've
keep
got
going.
a long list of them.
No, I know you do.
Don't get me.
No, I do want to
Yeah.
get you started, if you don't mind, just because even some things that you and I have spoke about, even the last Australian Open, you and I had a very similar pet peeve about decision making within the players as well in the moment. So, what else do you want to share with the world? This platform does reach a lot of countries, a lot of coaches.
Well, there's a couple big ones. Like I think everybody thinks that men and women make the same prize money in tennis, but just because they do at the majors. I think for the most part, women are probably making 25 cents on the dollar. Um, I I think the WTA puts out a phenomenal product. It's every bit as good. Um, so I would like to see better marketing and more equity in the sport. Um, and and I think for me, like, this week is Indian Wells. Next week, I think we're going to play a challenger in Phoenix. And there are some like young tennis journalists, media sometimes, who I think do like a great job. And we can't get them like credentials to come, like highlight events. Like tennis is a beautiful sport. Like I absolutely love it. I think I could, basically turned my whole life into watching it. Um, and I think there's a lot to talk about when we're watching matches. And I think the more that we can do to help highlight sort of some of the craziness that goes on out here, and maybe spotlight some of the cooler things and tell some of the stories of some of the players that we don't hear about all the time, instead of just like, I get it, like if Carlos or Serena or Arena, um, those are like 80-90% of the stories, and I don't think they're the best ones out there. So I would like to see some of the better stories get told, I guess, just to name a few.
Yeah. Well, I wanted twofold. The first thought I had is what we've been talking about so far. What's that got to do with business? You know, like a manager or a leader listening to this, they don't fail 30 to 40 times a year, right? So how yet maybe they do on a micro level. Like what you're talking about so far is life skills.
We lose 30, 40 times a year. I don't think we fail 30 or 40 times a year. I don't think of losing as failure. I think of not showing up as failure, or not giving your best as failure. Losing is something that we learn from. And I think it can add a lot of value. It can help build character, how we handle ourselves, even in the hard moments. I think is one of the things that tennis like presents. It's really good. It's supposed to be sort of like the gentleman's sport. Like, we're supposed to be able to both win and lose with class. That's the quote. My favorite poem over the center court at Wimbledon is, if we can meet with triumph and disaster and treat these two imposters just the same. Yeah, I don't think of it as failure, but adversity for sure.
And I think that right there, because that's what I think where I was going with that. In the business world, there is adversity all the time. So how you bounce back is so important. Could you give us a specific, could you highlight a story for us, perhaps where it's been a bit of adversity, or, and somebody's been able to bounce back, that you've worked with, and maybe how did you help do that?
Oh gosh. Yeah. I mean, tennis is one of like the most emotionally volatile, disturbing sports ever. So the number of times that like things have looked grim, or we've had bad results followed by good results. The one that just popped into my head right now is when I was with Danielle. I thought she was in a place playing some like amazing tennis. We were at the U.S. Open. She won her first round like 0-1, and was playing Elise Mertens in the second round on Louis Armstrong, which is like one of my all-time favorite courts. And she played a great first set. She won it. And I think in the second and third set, she must have missed like 15 balls by a combined 6 inches. It was a really tough way to go, because she was really swinging out, and the adjustments, like, just things were a little bit off. If it's maybe a little bit more humid that day, all those balls go in. I think we were going to have to play Coco Gauff, which probably would have been a night match on Armstrong the next night. And I think she was looking forward to that, maybe, and maybe contributed to some of the nerves. But that was a really tough loss. She took it hard. And we had to fly to San Diego a few days later. And I would say she wasn't in like the best headspace between there and San Diego, which was, another big event. It was a 500. And she had a really tough match in the first round against someone she probably shouldn't have had a tough match with. I think she was playing Luisa Chirico, who's a really good player. But I think Danielle at the time was playing, significantly stronger. And it was like a 7-6, 6-3 kind of match. And kind of like struggled through it. And then we had to play Ostapenko, who was like 13 in the world at the time. And she lost the first set, down 3-love in the second. And I don't know if it was she got angry or just found some resolve, but turned it around ended up winning that set, going down again 3-love in the second, coming back and winning, and then she went on a run. She ended up beating like Caro Garcia, like 2-2, and I think we made semis of the singles and finals of the doubles. And it was a great, like, sometimes after a really bad loss, it's like, I know you don't want to play right now. And so losing and then like that turnaround, sometimes the equation is like, how much time do we have and how far do we have to go between now and then? And it's timing it so that like you're not pushing too fast, which sometimes you'll get resistance for, and you're not going too slow because then you don't get ready. And sometimes, like that first round, you're like, we're not there yet. We have a little bit more to do. We need to build confidence a little bit. And so what are the ways we do that? And that can take some mental gymnastics sometimes. Sometimes it's sitting down and just processing stuff through talking. Sometimes it's, activities that can distract us, or we can build confidence in one area and take it with us on the tennis court sometimes. And sometimes that's what we have to do. It's like, go play a game that you're really good at and it reminds you, and then we can take that with us on the court. The confidence doesn't necessarily have to come directly from tennis, I think. So, but to me, that's actually the fun part. That's the part of this job. It's like the problem solving on the fly that I find really interesting. It's working with people and understanding their psychology. It really is very little about like specifically tennis in those moments.
Yep. Yep. So now seems like a good time to ask you our question we ask every single guest ever since the show started. And that is, in 1 to a maximum of 3 words, what do you think makes a great coach?
I mean, the bottom line, I think, for a coach is they have to make their player better, especially on tour. If your player's not doing better from week to week, you're not going to last.
Yep.
The resources that the players have are pretty limited, except for the players at the top. And if they bring you along, they're bringing you along because they think you can help. And finding ways to do that sometimes requires some creativity. Again, it's not always like going and hitting balls or feeding balls or breaking down strokes. But one way or another, it's helping them find the best version of their self. I think I very much can identify with Ted Lasso in terms of like how he coaches. It's, can we get the best out of a person? And it doesn't matter what sport, what arena. That's what we're trying to do. A good coach can do that.
Yeah. And as you just mentioned, and if that player is not getting better, then you will lose your job. And I think, again, that's another good lesson for business leaders out there. If you're not getting the best out of your team, then you need to.
Like, a lot of times coaches will lose their job even when they do a good job. It's funny, like on the women's side, you see players get into the top 10 for the first time. Almost always the first thing they do is change coaches. Less so on the men's side, but it's a little funny to me. It's not a job with a lot of security. So it is very much a sort of in the moment while I'm here, I'm going to do as much as I can. I think when I started this job like 6-7 years ago, doing it more full time, I was like, I just want to do like one tournament, like that'll be fun. And it was so much fun. I was like, I really hope I can do like a second tournament. And then if you realize like, I really like this, I want to stay out there, it becomes like, all right, well, how can I make myself so valuable that I, people want me to come help? And sort of, when you travel and the conditions are always less than ideal, we're not working with perfect circumstances most of the time on tennis. I think it takes a pretty versatile type of person to be able to do this kind of work.
Yeah, yeah. And these days, what do you think about? Obviously, you've known Tina Samara a very long time,
Yeah.
hence our connection. And she's obviously, not obviously, take that back. There's an unforced error by me. For those who don't know, she helps student athletes find US college scholarships. Do you think that the college system is still a great pathway for players wanting to play professionally?
I think it's actually becoming a better one. A lot of the good players right now are coming from college. I mean, now there's, I think in college they a lot of them are getting paid, which helps. And what's more is like for the challengers and the futures, schools are doing better at using those as recruiting tools. They're getting wild cards for some of the young players. If you want to start on your own at like 17, not coming from a college, the cost of traveling, being with a coach, developing physically, and you're probably not getting into a lot of tournaments unless whereas if you're like, you're going to Georgia or Texas or a school like that, um, they're putting you in the tournaments, they're training you, they're taking you to the tournaments, and hopefully setting you up so that by the time you graduate, you actually are in a much better position to make a good run at it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think right now is sort of a great time for college tennis. I
Hmm.
think unless you're sort of like already inside the top 200 by the time you're ready to make that choice, like it feels like a no-brainer. A lot of schools are saying you only have to go for a year or two, and if you're, if you get really good by then, like you can still come back and finish, when you're done playing. So I think there's very few reasons for
Yeah.
coaches for players to skip out on playing in college right now, which is nice to see, I think.
Yeah. All right, changing gears. What would you tell a younger Jared? You've got all the experience now. You're a tour coach warrior, so to speak. Like what's that?
Yeah.
What advice would
Well,
you have for your younger self?
I would have done a lot less. I was someone who was under the impression that I think um, if I wasn't like currently training, playing in the gym or doing something, uh, I was being outworked and someone was getting better than me. And so I think I was constantly breaking myself down with like shin splints or or plantar or something like that. And it just made it very hard to compete. I think I would have. Now what I know is like as many tennis balls as tennis players tend to hit. When they get to that level, the amount of time you spend hitting for most players, I think, is less than they realize. Um, so I think I would have rested and recovered a lot more, and I would have made a bigger priority about like making sure that life had room to fit in, not just like tennis all day, every day. I was ever going to make a living playing anyway. Um, but I certainly, looking back, I, I didn't give myself a great chance either.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And same question from a coach perspective. What about a coach listening, a young coach, or it doesn't matter where they are in their career, but what's that one thing that you want to leave coaches with? Like,
I mean, this is something, I mean, I look back on sort of my previous self and I cringe a lot. Um, because I think when you're a coach and you watch as much tennis as you watch and you think you know as much as you want the player to hear it. And so I think a lot of times coaches talk because they want to talk. And I think now I do a lot less of that. I wait for players to be ready to listen or to ask questions. And I sort of try and be there. And sometimes I'll ask questions to try and facilitate a specific conversation. Um, but it's not like constantly yapping or saying this or saying that. I think, right now I watch tennis, I watch kids play when they're younger, and 95 to 100% of the time, young good players are on the court, it's always with a coach who's always telling them what to do. And I'm like, first of all, that sounds miserable. You're learning to be a robot. You're not like actually learning to play tennis. There's like a rhythm, and unless you have like sort of room to feel it, if someone's barking instructions at you all the time, I think that can take a lot of the joy out of it. So, we don't want to let like bad habits start to creep in. So like some corrections you want to make quickly, but for the most part, like I would say like be quiet and step back and sort of like ask questions more than like tell people what to do. Have conversations. For me now, coaching is much more like a collaboration than like telling people what to do.
Mm. Well, you pretty much summarized what I do in the workplace these days. I've just swapped the runners for the heels, but it is about teaching people how to collaborate, how to be helpful. And I love this concept. I mean, anyone who's listened to this show knows how passionate I am about A, Ted Lasso, and B, asking questions, because I think the other thing to remember is that when we ask questions of them, it does facilitate an environment for them to ask questions back. And I'm
Right.
always so impressed when I come across a young person who can ask a question rather than just answering the ones that, I'm so curious. There's that word you mentioned as well. I'm asking them questions. And then when you pause for a minute to see what they do back or if they say nothing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had like a little kid who was like 11 come out to my court when I was home a couple weeks ago, and she came out and she looked and she's like, "What are we going to do?" And I was like, "I don't know. What do you want to do?" And it was like a pretty simple question, and she looked at me like I was an alien. And I'm like, was no one out? Like, what do you like? Like, what you tell me? Like, I'm here for you. Like, I'm not here to tell you what to do. What do you want to learn today? And it was like she'd never been asked before. I'm like, well, how do you like to play? What are the things you like to do? These are the things that like help promote joy when playing. Like, you mean like, oh, I have a choice? I'm like, you get a million choices in tennis. I'm only here to help you navigate them. I'm not making them for you. This is your journey.
Oh, pause there. Pause there. Everyone just pause the recording, go back 30 seconds and listen to what he just said again. Jared, that was a gold dust moment on the podcast. I got goosebumps and what you just said. Thank you for saying that.
Oh,
Yep. And thank you for your time and thank you for this wonderful conversation. All right, of course we finish with a rapid rally. Self-awareness is
essential.
Courage means
Courage means doing the thing that you're afraid of, not don't be afraid of it. Like we have to do things that we're afraid of all the time. Like this, that's courage. If you're not afraid, you're not brave.
choices are.
I don't know. Choices are they're everywhere. I think sometimes people forget how many choices we have in tennis. How much time should I take? Where should I hit? What kind of spin should I hit? What speed should I hit? Where do I like, there's a million. And I think the more you sort of lean into like how many choices you get to make, the more autonomy you have over your own game, the more fun the sport starts to get. I think a lot of times people just think like, I don't even think sometimes people think it's just like reacting to everything. I think one of the things that I say, you know, that I try to encourage a lot, sometimes it can look like a player is just responding to everything that the opponent is doing. I'm like, they hit there and you respond. They hit here and you do that. I'm like, but what do you want them to do and how do you get them to do that? Like, I don't want you to respond to what they do. I want them to do what you want them to do. So if you want this ball over here, how do we get that? Which is sort of a different way to frame the problem.
That's a great way to frame the opportunities that you want. And I wonder how many people have been asked that question as well, because sometimes it can, and it's too robotic sometimes with with, you should always approach down the line. Well, that's
Funny,
it.
I actually watched
1980s.
I watched an interesting video the other day on analytics and how, like, if you get a backhand approach and you go down the line, and typically where we would cover is line, that you'll win the point like 53% of the time on tour. Whereas if instead of playing a backhand down the line, you step around and rip your forehand cross, but instead of covering line, you actually cover cross. So you're forcing the more difficult, like a pass down the line instead of leaving cross open, you win 76% of the time. And this is just like a small example of how, like, tennis knowledge sort of changes with the time and you have to keep up with it. I think when I grew up learning, I learned a specific kind of footwork and stroke and tactics, and none of that is worth anything now. And I still hear people coach. I'm like, well, look, if you want to play tennis in 1984, then you're doing the right things. But if we're trying to compete today, we have to understand that the game is different, and here's what we need to do now.
Well, it's been, as I said, an absolute pleasure really having a mental gymnastic conversation with you on how can we make people better, not just players. How do we make people better? How do we shed light on all the stories that go on the tour? How do we collaborate and help, because less is more and questions are the answer? Thank you so much, Jared Jacobs, for being on the Coaching Podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And everybody, as always, thanks for listening.
The Coaching Podcast is sponsored by Transition Coach for Athletes, a global coaching, mentoring, and U.S. college sporting scholarship placement service. The service helps athletes navigate the often challenging world of choosing your best college fit while maximizing sports performance. Visit www.transitioncoachforathletes.com.